The starship Aurora cut through the endless black of space like a silver knife. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge, watching the ice-covered planet grow larger on the main screen. Kepler 442c looked like a giant snowball floating in the void. White and blue swirls covered its surface, and Jake could see massive ice sheets that stretched across entire continents. "We're getting some strange readings from the northern hemisphere," said Dr. Lisa Chang, looking up from her scanner. She was the team's expert on alien cultures and ancient civilizations. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her brown eyes showed excitement. "There's something big under all that ice." Jake walked over to her station. The screen showed a map of the planet's surface with red dots marking unusual energy signatures. "How big are we talking about?" "Huge, maybe the size of a small city. And it's giving off power readings that don't match anything natural." Lisa tapped her screen, bringing up more detailed scans. "Captain, I think we found something artificial. Down there." Communications Officer Ben Taylor spun around in his chair. He was a young man with sandy hair and quick fingers that never stopped moving across his control panel. "Sir, I'm picking up very faint signals from the same location. They're old, really old, but they're still active." Jake felt his pulse quicken. Finding active alien technology was rare. Most of the ancient civilizations they discovered had been dead for thousands of years. "Can you tell what kind of signals?" "Not yet, but they're definitely artificial. The patterns are too regular to be natural." Ben's fingers danced across his controls, trying to clean up the signal. "Whatever's down there, it's been running for a very long time." Engineer Pete Rodriguez looked up from his workstation. He was a stocky man with calloused hands and grease stains on his uniform. "Captain, if there's active tech down there, we need to be careful. Ancient alien systems can be unpredictable." Jake nodded. Pete was right to be cautious, but Jake's curiosity was stronger than his fear. "Lisa, any idea which species might have built this?" Lisa studied her readings for a long moment. "Based on the energy patterns and the construction methods, I think it might be Vorthek. They were known for building massive underground complexes." The name sent a chill through the bridge crew. Everyone in the galaxy knew about the Vorthek Empire. They had been one of the most advanced civilizations ever discovered. Their technology was thousands of years ahead of most species, and their intelligence was legendary. They had vanished mysteriously about 10,000 years ago, leaving behind only ruins and legends. "The Vorthek built this?" Ben asked, his voice quiet with awe. "It matches their known architectural patterns," Lisa confirmed. "They loved complex geometric designs and massive scale construction. Plus, they often built their most important facilities underground." Jake made his decision. "Take us down. Find a safe landing spot as close to the structure as possible." The Aurora descended through the planet's thin atmosphere. The surface was a wasteland of ice and snow, broken only by massive glaciers and frozen mountains. The ship's scanners found a flat area about 2 kilometers from the buried structure. As they landed, Jake could feel the excitement building in his crew. They were explorers at heart, and the chance to explore a Vorthek facility was the discovery of a lifetime. "Full environmental suits," Jake ordered. "We don't know what kind of atmosphere or dangers we might face down there." The away team consisted of Jake, Lisa, Ben, and Pete. They suited up in the Aurora's equipment bay, checking their gear twice. The planet's surface was brutally cold, and their suits would need to work perfectly to keep them alive. The ice above the structure was thick, but Pete's cutting tools made quick work of it. Steam rose from the melted ice as they carved a path downward. After an hour of careful work, they broke through into a vast underground chamber. Jake's helmet lights revealed walls made of some kind of crystalline material that seemed to glow with its own inner light. The walls were covered in complex patterns that hurt to look at directly. They seemed to shift and move when viewed from the corner of the eye. "This is definitely Vorthic," Lisa whispered, her voice full of wonder. "Look at those geometric patterns. They're mathematical equations, but incredibly advanced ones." As they moved deeper into the structure, their lights revealed something that made them all stop in shock. The chamber was filled with dozens of crystalline pods, each one containing a frozen figure. "Are those Ben started to ask. "Aliens." Pete finished. "Lots of them." Jake approached the nearest pod. Inside was a creature unlike anything he had ever seen. It had 6 arms, 3 eyes, and skin that looked like polished metal. Ice crystals covered its body, but Jake could see that it was perfectly preserved. "Captain," Lisa called from another pod. "This one's different. It looks like it's from the Zephyrian Empire. And this one over here looks crystalline." Jake moved from pod to pod, amazed by what he was seeing. Each pod contained a different species. Some he recognized from historical records, others were completely unknown. There were dozens of them, all frozen in the same crystalline material. "Why are they all here?" Ben asked. "This looks like some kind of collection." Lisa was running her scanner over the nearest pod. "Captain, these aren't just frozen. According to my readings, they're still alive. Brain activity is minimal, but it's there. It's like they're in some kind of suspended animation." Pete was examining the pods. "Base. There are control panels here. Still active, from the looks of it. And there are connection cables running from each pod to some kind of central system." Jake followed the cables with his eyes. They all led to a raised platform in the center of the chamber. On the platform stood a complex control console covered in Vorthac symbols. "It's like they're all connected to something," Jake said. Ben's communication equipment suddenly crackled to life. "Captain, I'm getting a stronger signal now. It's coming from that central console." As they approached the platform, the console began to glow brighter. Holographic displays flickered to life, showing complex diagrams and flowing text in the Vorthic language. "Can you translate any of that?" Jake asked Lisa. She studied the displays carefully. "Some of it, it's talking about trials and tests. Something about proving worthiness." She paused, reading more carefully. "Captain, I think this is some kind of testing facility. The aliens in those pods, they're not prisoners. They're participants." "Participants in what?" Before Lisa could answer, the console's glow intensified. A new holographic display appeared, showing a 3-dimensional maze made entirely of ice. The maze was enormous, with countless passages and chambers stretching in all directions. "I think we just found out what kind of test this is," Pete said quietly. The maze rotated slowly in the holographic display, revealing its incredible complexity. Some passages led to dead ends, others connected to vast chambers filled with strange symbols and equations. At the center of the maze was a brilliant light that pulsed like a heartbeat. "It's beautiful," Ben whispered. "And deadly," Lisa added, looking at her scanner readings. "Captain, I'm detecting massive energy fields throughout that maze." "Whatever's in there, it's designed to challenge the mind as much as the body." Jake stared at the rotating maze, trying to understand what they had stumbled into. The Vorthic were known for their intellectual challenges, but this was beyond anything he had imagined. The console suddenly spoke, its voice echoing through the chamber in perfect English. "New subjects detected. Species unknown. Initiating preliminary assessment." The voice that came from the console was cold and mechanical, but Jake could hear something else in it. Curiosity, maybe even amusement. "Analysis complete," the voice continued. "Species designation unknown. Brain capacity appears limited. Physical form primitive. Estimated challenge completion probability 0.01%. Pete looked at the others with raised eyebrows. "Did this thing just call us stupid?" "I think it did," Ben replied, trying not to laugh. The holographic display changed. showing detailed scans of each team member. Jake could see his own body outlined in blue light, with measurements and calculations flowing beside it. These beings show typical carbon-based intelligence patterns, the voice explained. Neural processing speed falls within standard biological parameters. However, their cranial capacity is notably small compared to previous subjects. Lisa stepped closer to the console. Previous subjects? You mean all those frozen aliens? Correct. Over the past 12,000 standard years, representatives from 437 different species have attempted the eternal challenge. All have failed to reach the center of the maze. Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air. What happens to those who fail? They become permanent residents of the facility. Their minds remain active within the virtual maze environment, while their bodies are preserved for study. It is quite efficient. The team exchanged worried glances. This was definitely not what they had signed up for when they landed on the planet. What exactly is this challenge? Lisa asked. The holographic maze appeared again, rotating slowly in the air above the console. The eternal challenge tests the ultimate limits of intelligence and reasoning. Only beings capable of transcending their biological limitations can hope to complete it. The maze adapts to each species, becoming more complex based on their cognitive abilities. Pete walked around the console, studying the frozen aliens and their crystalline pods. So all these guys tried and got stuck? Precise. The Zephyrian delegation arrived 8,000 years ago. Their mathematical abilities were impressive, but insufficient. The Crystalline Collective attempted the challenge 6,000 years ago. Their multidimensional thinking showed promise, but they too fell short of the requirement. Ben was recording everything on his communication device. What happens if someone actually completes the maze? All subjects are released. The facility shuts down. The challenge ends forever. Has anyone ever come close? Jake asked. The Vorthik themselves came closest. They reached 87% completion before their minds were overwhelmed by the final sequence. That was approximately 10,000 years ago. Lisa looked up from her scanner. Wait, the Vorthik built this place and then got trapped in their own maze? Correct. The creators believed their own intelligence was sufficient to complete their ultimate challenge. They were incorrect. Jake shook his head. The Vorthak were legendary for their intelligence, and even they couldn't finish their own test. What chance did humans have? Pete was still examining the control console when his elbow accidentally bumped against a glowing panel. The console flashed bright blue, and suddenly alarms started ringing throughout the chamber. Warning. Accidental activation detected. Subject preparation beginning immediately. What did you do? Jake shouted over the alarm noise. I don't know. I just touched something. Pete backed away from the console, but it was too late. The floor beneath Pete's feet began to glow. Blue light traveled up his legs, surrounding his entire body. He tried to move but found himself frozen in place. Pete! Lisa rushed toward him, but an invisible barrier stopped her several feet away. Transport to maze entrance initiating, the voice announced. Subject will retain full consciousness throughout the challenge. Good luck, primitive being. Wait, Jake called out. You can't just take him. The challenge has been activated. Once begun, it cannot be stopped until completion or failure. Pete looked at his teammates through the blue glow surrounding him. Guys, I don't think I'm qualified for this. You'll be fine, Jake said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Just stay calm and think your way through it. Thinking was never my strong point, Pete replied with a nervous laugh. I'm better with my hands than my brain. The blue light grew brighter, and Pete began to fade away like smoke. In seconds, he was gone completely. The alarm stopped ringing. The holographic display changed to show a view inside the maze. Pete was standing in a corridor made entirely of ice. The walls were smooth and reflected the blue light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Pete, can you hear us? Ben called into his communication device. Pete's voice came through clearly. Yeah, I can hear you. This place is weird. The ice walls are like mirrors, and I can see myself reflected in all directions. The maze corridor stretched out in front of Pete like a frozen hallway. Ice covered the floor, making it slippery. Strange symbols glowed on the walls, pulsing with different colors. The first challenge is simple pattern recognition, the voice explained to the team watching from outside. Most species require several hours to decipher the mathematical sequence. The Vorthek completed this section in 47 minutes. On the holographic display, they could see symbols appearing on the walls around Pete. The symbols were complex geometric shapes that seemed to shift and change as they watched. Pete looked at the symbols for a few seconds, then shrugged. Looks like the combo lock on my gym locker back home. He started touching the symbols in a seemingly random order. Jake expected alarms to sound or walls to close in, but instead, a door opened at the far end of the corridor. Impossible, the voice sighed, and for the first time, it sounded surprised. First challenge completed in 37 seconds. This is unprecedented. Pete was already walking toward the next section. The ice under his feet was slippery, but he seemed comfortable moving on it. He slid along like he was skating, using the walls to push himself forward faster. How did you solve that so quickly? Lisa called through the communication system. I didn't really solve it, Pete replied, still sliding along the ice. I just picked the symbols that looked like the numbers on my old locker combination. 6-2-4-9. It worked on my locker for 3 years. Figured it might work here too. The watching team stood in stunned silence. Pete had just solved a mathematical puzzle that was designed to challenge the greatest minds in the galaxy, and he had done it by remembering his gym locker combination. This is highly irregular, the voice muttered. Proceeding to second challenge, difficulty level increasing. The maze around Pete changed. The corridor widened into a large chamber filled with floating ice platforms. Each platform had symbols carved into its surface, and they were constantly moving, rotating around each other in complex patterns. Temporal spatial reasoning test activated, the voice announced. Subjects must calculate the precise movement patterns of 47 independent variables to determine the correct jumping sequence. Pete looked up at the floating platforms and grinned. Oh, this is like that old video game I used to play. Frogger, but with ice. Without any hesitation, Pete jumped onto the first platform. As it moved, he jumped to the next one, then the next. He moved with natural timing, like he was playing a game he had mastered years ago. Second challenge completed. In 4 minutes and 12 seconds, the voice said, its tone becoming increasingly bewildered. Previous record was held by the Quantum Collective at 2 hours and 36 minutes. Jake watched his engineer slide and jump through the maze like he was having fun at an ice rink. Pete, how are you doing this? I'm not really thinking about it, Pete replied, landing on another platform. I'm just playing the game, you know. It's actually kind of fun. The voice fell silent for a long moment. When it spoke again, there was something new in its tone. Confusion. This subject's approach is completely outside established parameters. Proceeding to challenge level 3. The maze changed around Pete again. This time, he found himself in a circular room with walls covered in equations that seemed to write themselves in glowing letters. Numbers and symbols flowed across the ice like living things, creating patterns. That made his eyes water when he tried to focus on them. Challenge level 3 activated, the voice announced. Advanced mathematical reasoning. The subject must solve the infinite spiral theorem, a problem that has puzzled the greatest mathematical minds for millennia. Jake watched from outside the maze, feeling helpless. The equations on the walls looked impossibly complex. Even Lisa who had studied alien mathematics, was shaking her head in amazement. "Those calculations would take our best computers weeks to solve," she whispered. Pete stood in the center of the room, slowly turning to look at all the flowing numbers. The equations covered every surface, ceiling to floor, spinning and changing constantly. Most people would have been overwhelmed by the sheer complexity. "Pete, take your time," Jake said through the communication system. "Don't let it intimidate you." "Intimidate me?" Pete laughed. "Captain, this looks exactly like the screensaver on my old computer. You know, the one where numbers and letters bounce around the screen. I used to watch it for hours when I was bored." He walked to one of the walls and started tracing patterns in the air with his finger, following the movement of certain numbers as they flowed across the surface. "The infinite spiral theorem requires understanding of 17-dimensional mathematics," the voice explained, sounding confused. "No carbon-based life form has ever demonstrated such capability." Pete wasn't listening to the voice. He was humming quietly to himself, a simple tune that Jake recognized as an old Earth song. As Pete hummed, he continued tracing patterns in the air, his movements becoming more confident. "Got it," Pete said suddenly. "Got what?" Ben asked. "The pattern. It's like a song, you know, the numbers move in rhythm. Once you hear the beat, it's easy to follow." Pete pressed his hand against a specific spot on the wall where several number sequences intersected. The room flashed bright white, and suddenly, all the equations stopped moving. They arranged themselves into neat, organized rows. "Challenge 3 completed in 7 minutes and 43 seconds, the voice said, its tone now openly bewildered. "This is mathematically impossible. The theorem has never been solved in less than 6 months." Outside the maze, Lisa was staring at her scanner readings. "Captain, according to my instruments, Pete just solved a mathematical problem that our best scientists said couldn't be done." "How?" Jake asked. "I honestly don't know. He treated it like it was music instead of mathematics." The maze shifted again, creating a new path for Pete to follow. As he walked down the ice corridor, the walls began showing him images. Jake could see them on the holographic display, pictures of different alien civilizations, their achievements, their failures. "Challenge level 4, the voice announced. "Philosophical reasoning. The subject must answer the great question that has divided civilizations for eons. What is the ultimate purpose of intelligent existence?" The images on the walls showed wars between species, the rise and fall of empires, the creation of art and technology, and the endless search for meaning that drove all intelligent life. "Previous subjects have spent decades contemplating this question," the voice explained. "The Vorthic philosophers debated it for 3 centuries before attempting an answer." Pete looked at the images flowing past him on the walls. Scenes of alien life, love, war, discovery, loss, and hope played out like a movie. Some images were beautiful, others were terrible, but all of them showed beings trying to find their place in the universe. "Heavy stuff," Pete muttered, scratching his head. Jake held his breath. This wasn't a pattern recognition test or a jumping puzzle. This was the kind of deep philosophical question that had stumped the greatest thinkers in the galaxy. How could Pete possibly answer it? Pete stopped walking and stood quietly for a moment, watching the images. Then he shrugged and spoke to the air, "To have fun and help your friends." The maze went completely silent. Even the humming of the machinery stopped. Jake could hear his own heartbeat in the stillness. "Clarification required," the voice finally said. "Please elaborate on this philosophical position." "It's not complicated," Pete replied, still looking at the images. "Look at all these pictures. Every species, every civilization, they're all just trying to figure out how to be happy and take care of each other. Some of them make it really complicated with all their thinking and analyzing, but it's basically just about having a good time and making sure nobody gets left behind. The images on the walls began moving faster, showing moments of joy, friendship, and cooperation between different species. But what about pursuit of knowledge? The advancement of civilization? The transcendence of biological limitations? The voice asked. Pete chuckled. Those are just different ways of having fun and helping people. You discover new things because it's exciting. You build better technology because it makes life easier for everyone. You try to become better than you are because it feels good to grow. It all comes back to the same thing. The corridor ahead of Pete opened up, revealing another path deeper into the maze. Challenge 4 completed in 2 minutes and 11 seconds, the voice said, its tone now completely flat with shock. This response is unprecedented. Outside the maze, Jake was shaking his head in amazement. How is he doing? This? Lisa was studying her readings again. Captain, I think the maze is having trouble processing Pete's responses because they're so different from what it expects. Every other species that tried this challenge approached it like a test to be passed. Pete is treating it like a conversation with a friend. Ben was monitoring the communication systems. The whole facility is changing. Energy patterns are shifting throughout the complex. Jake looked at the frozen aliens in their crystalline pods. Some of them seemed to be stirring, their faces showing. The first signs of movement in thousands of years. The maze is losing power over them, Lisa observed. As Pete progresses, the hold on the other prisoners is weakening. On the display, they watched Pete continue through the maze. He was sliding along the ice corridors now, using the smooth surfaces like a skating rink. Occasionally he would push off the walls to build up speed, laughing as he went. Challenge! Level 5 activated, the voice announced, but it sounded tired now. Ultimate logic sequence. The subject must ... Let me guess, Pete interrupted, still sliding along the ice. Another puzzle? This is the final cognitive barrier before the center chamber. It has defeated every intelligence that has attempted it, including the Vorthic themselves. Pete slid into a vast chamber filled with floating geometric shapes. Each shape was covered in symbols, and they moved in complex three-dimensional patterns around each other. The shapes were beautiful but alien, following mathematical rules that seemed to defy understanding. Temporal quantum mathematical synthesis required, the voice explained. The subject must understand the fundamental nature of reality itself. To proceed, Pete looked up at the dancing shapes and grinned. Oh, I know this one. It's like those mobile things people hang over baby cribs. Pretty shapes that move around to make the kid happy. He reached up and gently touched one of the floating shapes. It chimed like a bell, producing a beautiful musical note. Pete touched another shape, then another, creating a simple melody. It's not about understanding reality, Pete said as he continued to make music with the floating shapes. It's about enjoying it. The shapes began moving differently, responding to Pete's touches and creating harmonies. Soon the entire chamber was filled with beautiful music, and the shapes were dancing to the rhythm Pete had created. A doorway opened at the far end of the chamber, revealing a bright light beyond. Impossible, the voice whispered. Final challenge. Completed. Subject may proceed to the center. Pete slid toward the bright doorway, still humming along with the music he had created. Behind him, the frozen aliens in the main chamber began to wake up, their crystalline prison starting to crack and melt. Hey guys, Pete called back to his team through the communication system. I think I'm about to win this thing, and you know what? It's been pretty fun. Pete stepped through the bright doorway and found himself in a completely different place. The ice walls were gone, replaced by smooth metal surfaces that seemed to pulse with their own light. The floor beneath his feet was warm and solid, no longer the slippery ice he had been skating on. Where am I now? Pete asked, looking around the strange new environment. You have reached the transition chamber, the voice replied, but it sounded different now, less cold, more curious. This is where the virtual maze connects to the physical world. You are no longer in a mental simulation. Back in the main chamber, Jake watched as more of the frozen aliens began to stir. The crystalline pods were cracking, and some of the creatures inside were opening their eyes for the first time in centuries. "Something's happening," Lisa said, checking her scanner. "The entire facility is changing. Power levels are fluctuating throughout the complex." Ben was monitoring multiple communication channels. "Captain, I'm getting signals from the Aurora. Navigator Amy Foster is asking if she can join the away team." Jake thought for a moment. The situation was changing rapidly, and they might need more help. "Tell her to suit up and get down here, but tell her to be careful. Already on my way." Amy's voice came through the communication system. "I saw the energy readings from orbit. Whatever Pete's doing down there, it's impressive." Amy Foster was the Aurora's navigation specialist. She was young, barely 25, with short red hair and quick reflexes that made her one of the best pilots in the fleet. She also had a reputation for being fearless, sometimes to the point of recklessness. In the transition chamber, Pete found himself facing a new challenge. The room contained what looked like a control console, but it was unlike anything he had ever seen. Instead of buttons and screens, it had floating crystals that moved in slow patterns around a central hub. "The final test," the voice explained. "To reach the center of the maze, you must synchronize with the facility's core systems. This requires perfect coordination between mind and machine." Pete approached the floating crystals. As he got closer, they began to glow brighter and move faster. "What exactly am I supposed to do?" Previous subjects attempted to analyze the crystal patterns and calculate the optimal synchronization sequence. The Vortex spent decades trying to understand the mathematical principles involved. "And how did that work out for them?" Pete asked. "They failed. All subjects have failed." At this point, Pete reached out and gently touched one of the floating crystals. It felt warm and smooth, almost alive. When he touched it, the crystal pulsed and changed color. Other crystals around it began to respond, creating a chain reaction of light and movement. "This is weird," Pete said, touching another crystal. "It's like they're talking to each other." Amy arrived in the main chamber just as the facility's voice made an announcement that surprised everyone. "Additional human subject detected. Requesting permission to enter the maze." "What?" Jake said. "The maze can do that?" "The facility's protocols are adapting," Lisa explained, studying her readings. "Pete's progress has triggered changes throughout the system." Amy looked at the holographic display showing Pete in the transition chamber. "Can I help him?" "Unknown," the voice replied. "No subject has ever requested assistance before. This is outside established parameters." "Well, let's try something new," Amy said with a grin. "Where do I sign up?" Before anyone could stop her, Amy walked over to the control console and pressed the same panel that Pete had accidentally activated earlier. The blue light surrounded her just as it had surrounded Pete. "Amy, what are you doing?" Jake called out. "Pete's been having all the fun," Amy replied as she began to fade away. "Besides, two heads are better than one, right?" The light faded, and Amy was gone. On the holographic display, they could see her appearing in the maze's first chamber. "This is highly irregular," the voice muttered. Two subjects in the maze simultaneously, adjusting challenge parameters. Amy found herself in the same ice corridor where Pete had started his journey, but the maze had changed. Instead of the pattern recognition test that Pete had faced, Amy saw a three-dimensional map floating in the air. "Navigation challenge activated," the voice announced. "Subject must plot the optimal course through 17,000 possible pathways to reach the current location of the first subject." Amy looked at the floating map and laughed. "Seriously? This is what I do for a living." She began tracing routes through the holographic maze with her finger, calculating speeds and distances like she was plotting a course through an asteroid field. Within minutes, she had identified the fastest path to Pete's location. "Route calculated," Amy said, taking the express lane. She started moving through the maze, but unlike Pete's careful progression through each challenge, Amy was moving fast. She slid along the ice corridors like a professional racer, taking corners at high speed and jumping over obstacles with perfect timing. "This is amazing," she called out as she sped through the maze. "It's like the best ice rink in the galaxy." Back in the transition chamber, Pete was still working with the floating crystals. He had discovered that they responded to touch, but also to movement and even to the sound of his voice. As he experimented, the crystals began to form new patterns. "Pete," Amy's voice came through the communication system. "I'm on my way to you. The maze is like a giant playground." "Amy, how did you get in here?" I volunteered. "Hope you don't mind the company," Pete grinned. "Actually, I could use some help." "This crystal thing is tricky." The voice interrupted there. Conversation. Two subjects working together was not anticipated. The maze protocols are ... thing. The facility around them began to change. New pathways opened, connecting different sections of the maze. The challenges became more complex but also more cooperative, requiring teamwork instead of individual effort. Amy reached Pete's location in record time, sliding into the transition chamber like she was coming home from a victory race. "Nice place," she said, looking around at the floating crystals. "Very pretty. What do we need to do?" "I think we need to make them all light up at the same time," Pete explained. "But every time I touch one, it changes the pattern of all the others." Amy studied the crystal arrangement. "It's like a three-dimensional puzzle. You work on that side, I'll work on this side. We'll coordinate our movements." They began working together, Pete touching crystals on one side of the formation while Amy worked on the other. When they moved in harmony, the crystals responded by creating beautiful patterns of light and sound. "It's working," Pete said. "Keep going." The crystals began to pulse in rhythm, their lights growing brighter with each synchronized movement. The entire chamber filled with music, similar to what Pete had created with the floating shapes, but more complex and beautiful. "Final synchronization achieved," the voice announced, but it no longer sounded mechanical. There was something almost human in its tone now. "Subjects may proceed to the center chamber." A new doorway opened, revealing a corridor that led deeper into the facility's heart. But this corridor was different from the others. Instead of ice or metal, the walls seemed to be made of pure light. "You know what?" Amy said, looking at the glowing pathway. "I think we're about to find out what this whole thing was really about." Pete nodded. "Whatever it is, I'm glad you're here. This is way more fun with a partner." They walked together into the corridor of light, while behind them, the maze began to shut down. Throughout the facility, the frozen aliens continued to wake up, their crystalline prisons dissolving as the ancient systems finally began to release their hold. In the main chamber, Jake watched as centuries-old beings opened their eyes and took their first free breaths in millennia. "Captain," Lisa said, her voice full of wonder, "I think Pete and Amy are about to do something that no one in the galaxy has ever done before." "What's that?" "They're about to beat the unbeatable challenge. And they're doing it by working together. And having fun." The facility's voice spoke one final time before Pete and Amy disappeared into the light. "Subjects have exceeded all expectations. Proceeding to final revelation." Pete and Amy walked through the corridor of light, their footsteps echoing strangely in the glowing space. The walls around them pulsed with colors that had no names, and the air itself seemed to hum with ancient power. "This is incredible," Amy whispered, reaching out to touch one of the light walls. Her hand passed through it like warm water. "It's like walking inside a rainbow." They emerged into the largest chamber they had seen yet. The room was perfectly circular and impossibly vast, with a domed ceiling that seemed to stretch up forever. In the center of the chamber stood a single pillar of pure crystal, taller than a building and wider than a house. "Welcome to the heart of the maze," the voice said, but now it came from everywhere at once. "You have achieved what no intelligence in 12,000 years has accomplished." Pete looked around the chamber in amazement. "So what happens now? Do we get a prize or something?" "You get the truth," the voice replied, "and the choice that comes with it." The crystal pillar began to glow, and images appeared in its surface. Pete and Amy could see the history of the facility playing out like a movie. They watched as the Vorthak built the maze, designed it, and then entered it themselves. The Vorthak created this challenge to find beings capable of transcending pure logic, the voice explained. They believed that intelligence alone was insufficient for true understanding. They sought minds that could think beyond calculation and reason. The images showed the Vorthak as they really were, not the cold, logical beings that history remembered, but creatures capable of great emotion and creativity. They had built the maze not as a test of intelligence, but as a search for something else entirely. What were they looking for? Amy asked. "Joy," the voice said simply. "The ability to find happiness and meaning in the act of living itself." The Vorthak had become so focused on logic and advancement that they had forgotten how to simply enjoy existence. More images flowed through the crystal. Pete and Amy saw civilizations rising and falling, species achieving great technological heights, only to lose their sense of wonder and happiness. They saw beings who could calculate the movement of galaxies, but couldn't laugh at a simple joke. Every species that entered this maze approached it as a problem to be solved. The voice continued. They brought their greatest minds, their most advanced computers, their most sophisticated reasoning. All of them failed because they were trying to think their way through challenges that required feeling. Pete scratched his head. "So you were looking for people who could have fun?" "Yes." The Vorthak realized too late that intelligence without joy is meaningless. They built this facility hoping that someday, beings would come who could show them what they had lost. Amy was studying the crystal pillar. But the Vorthak got trapped in their own maze. They entered the challenge hoping to rediscover their own capacity for joy. But they had spent so long thinking logically that they could not break free from their patterns. They became the maze's first prisoners. The crystal began to pulse brighter, and new images appeared. These showed Pete and Amy's journey through the maze, but from a different perspective. Instead of seeing challenges and tests, they saw two friends playing games together. "You succeeded because you never forgot that challenges can be enjoyable," the voice said. "You treated each test as an opportunity for fun rather than a problem to be endured. You worked together not because it was logical, but because it felt right." Pete looked at Amy and grinned. "We did have a pretty good time, didn't we?" "Best maze I've ever been in," Amy agreed. "Though to be fair, it's the only maze I've ever been in." The crystal pillar suddenly split open like a flower, revealing a small chamber inside. Within the chamber stood a figure in a crystalline suit, one of the original Vorthak. But unlike the frozen prisoners they had seen before, this one was moving, alive, and looking directly at them. "I am the keeper," the figure said, stepping out of the crystal. Its voice was different from the facility's AI, warmer, more emotional. "I have waited here for 12,000 years for beings like you to arrive." The keeper was tall and graceful, with features that seemed to shift between different alien characteristics. Its eyes glowed with the same light as the crystal pillar. "The facility's AI was programmed to find joy, but I was chosen to recognize it," the keeper explained. "I have watched every species attempt this challenge. I have seen great minds fail because they could not remember how to play." Pete stepped forward. "So what happens now? Do we free everyone?" "That choice is yours," the keeper replied. "The maze can be shut down permanently, freeing all the trapped minds. But doing so will also destroy all the knowledge and technology stored here. The greatest library in the galaxy will be lost forever. Amy and Pete looked at each other. It seemed like an impossible choice. Save the prisoners or preserve the knowledge. Or, the keeper continued, the facility can be transformed. Instead of a prison that tests intelligence, it could become a place that teaches joy. A school where advanced civilizations can learn to play again. That sounds better, Pete said. Everyone gets freed, but the place stays useful. But it would require teachers, the keeper warned. Beings who understand how to find happiness in simple things. Beings who can show others that the greatest achievements mean nothing without the ability to enjoy them. Amy laughed. Are you offering us a job? I am offering your species a gift and a responsibility. Humans have shown they possess what the galaxy has lost. You could help other civilizations rediscover their capacity for joy. Pete thought about all the aliens they had seen frozen in the facility. Creatures from dozens of different worlds, all trapped because they had forgotten how to have fun. We'd need help. This is bigger than just the two of us. Your crew would be welcome, the keeper said. And others from your species. This facility could become a bridge between worlds, a place where different civilizations learn from each other. Back in the main chamber, Jake watched as the last of the crystalline pods dissolved completely. Aliens who had been frozen for millennia were sitting up, looking around in wonder. Some were crying with joy, others were laughing, and all of them seemed amazed to be alive. Captain, Ben called out, I'm getting a transmission from Pete and Amy. Pete's voice came through clearly. Hey Jake, we found the boss of this place. Turns out the whole thing was basically a test to see if anyone still knew how to have a good time. Who would have thought? And we passed, Amy added. But now, we've got a decision to make. The keeper's voice joined the transmission. Captain Morrison, your crew has accomplished something remarkable. They have freed not just the prisoners in this facility, but potentially every advanced civilization that has lost its way. Jake looked around at the awakening aliens, at his amazed crew, at the incredible technology surrounding them. What do you need from us? Time and teachers, the keeper replied. This facility could become something wonderful, a place where the galaxy's greatest minds can learn that intelligence and joy work best together. Pete's voice came through again. What do you say, Captain? Want to help run the galaxy's first amusement park for geniuses? Jake found himself laughing despite the seriousness of the situation. You know what, Pete? That sounds like exactly the kind of job humans would be good at. The crystal pillar began to glow brighter, and throughout the facility, ancient systems hummed to life with new purpose. The maze was transforming, its corridors becoming classrooms, and its challenges becoming games. Welcome to the new beginning, the keeper said. Class starts tomorrow. Amy's laughter echoed through the communication system. This is going to be the best job ever. And for the first time in 12,000 years, the ancient facility filled with the sound of genuine happiness, the laughter of beings who had remembered how to play.